Hi, Aaron.
We're online. Excellent.
Aaron, how are you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on. I caught the tail end of that session, which is good because I think that I'm going to be able to add something kind of following on from what the folks were talking about with DevOps on the last session. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm excited.
yeah, we all are excited for this session. So, Aaron, going forward, can you give a quick intro about you? What you're doing and from where you are actually attending this session. So, from where you're presenting and what your talk is going to be about. Meanwhile, I'll share your screen to the stream.
Yep. Let me just kick off the screen share,
Sure.
and there we go. So I've added that to StreamYard.
It's
We'll
live.
minimize this so I don't have so I can see my speaker notes. And
Yeah.
excellent. Let's get going. And if I click through, so hello everyone that's watching on YouTube and Twitch, and I've seen at least 2 or 3 other different broadcast mediums that we're presenting today. My name is Aaron Powell. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. I've been doing web development for 15 or so years now, and it's been a lot of it in the front end space, but I've also done a fair bit server side. I started with classic ASP and stuff like that. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about DevOps. So again, it's a good thing that we've just had a really in-depth view of the Azure DevOps product and learn some stuff about there, because I want to kind of follow on a bit more around how we can use some DevOps tools with serverless applications, and also how serverless can fit into DevOps pipelines that we might be building. You can find me online at a bunch of places on social media, on Twitter and my website, and if there's my email address if you have any questions that you would prefer to ask me over email and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's me. That's what we're hopefully going to be covering off today. So shall we get started? I'm going to take that as a yes. This is the challenge with online events, is I actually can't see audience feedback, so I don't know if everyone has just gone to sleep or they're playing with their phones or something like that. But I want to start talking a bit about my journey with the way that I was doing deployments when I first got it started in the industry, and how that sort of shaped the way that I look at the role that DevOps, and in particular the continuous integration and continuous deployment, or the CI/CD aspect of DevOps, how that fits into the applications we build, and in particular the role that it plays in serverless applications that people are building these days. So when I got started, this was how we were doing deployments. We would connect via like an FTP server or a network share or something like that. We would open up the file that we needed to change on the server. We would change it. We would hit save. It would upload, and we'd be done, right? Like, and that's what we were doing. Like, we were quite literally editing in production, because when I got started, it was all scripting languages. It was VB script from classic ASP. It was PHP and stuff like that. So like, the notion of source control wasn't that common in a lot of the companies I worked with early on. So it was very much the sort of the Wild West. But that has, obviously some concerns. So we started thinking about how we could do this a little bit more, I guess, repeatable to a degree, or at least give us a little bit more confidence. And we would do that by accessing a network share on the production server, or a network share that was available to the production server. We'd copy up a zip file from one of the developers' machines, which was what we were going to hope was the latest release that we were copying up. And like, then there'd be folders of full of zip files, which was all the old releases. So at least we could do rollback, because, well, we had all the previous releases. And then you would log in via like an FTP, or like an RDP session, or a VNC or something like that, unpack the zip file, copy the files into the location, and there was your deployment done. Generally just overwriting them, and you'd end up with files everywhere that had like .back or like _final _date stamp, and like those were the ones that you knew how to roll back to. But these were generally accompanied by a run book of some sort, like a physical or a digital run book, which was a series of steps that you would go through in, this is the stuff that you have to do. These are the people you have to talk to when you're doing a deployment. Now, this, while I might have made it up for the slides today, it's actually fairly indicative of a lot of the run books that I worked with, like, except for the fact that there was actually a step removed here, step 2, someone removed that, but that was never the case when you were doing run books. They were always, like, no one ever updated them. They were always out of date, and you'd be confused when you're trying to do your first deployment. But I was doing this for years and years, and I never saw this as something that might not have been an optimal way to do deployments. It was like, this is just how we did it. It worked. But there was a lot of stuff could go wrong because this was a very manual process, a very human-driven process. And unfortunately, we as humans are fallible. You edit the wrong file and all of a sudden you've taken the website down, or you upload something to an incorrect location and it doesn't, changes don't get reflected in production. You can't quite determine why that's happened. And like, no matter how good your run book was, how detailed it was, you were never deploying on a Friday afternoon because you did not want to be the person last in the office on Friday night trying to debug why the production server has gone down because you've just done the latest deployment and you're madly trying to work out where the previous stuff was that you needed. So that's when we started looking at automation, and automation was kind of the next big thing in the way that we did build and release and like deployments of applications. And they generally focused around 3 core phases. You had some sort of action that was going to be triggered by an event. And that was an event that might have been pushed to source control. It might have been hit a button in a web application that was going to trigger off the build, like we saw in the last session, or whatever it might be. Like, something triggered an action to happen. And then that action would generate some form of a package, like a zip file or like an artifact drop onto a network share or anything like that. But this was the thing that was, your output, where like previously we might have had a run book that said open up VS and compile the application. We were now having that compiled by running a bat file and executing the MS build command instead of actually using Visual Studio or like a make file to generate our like C++ applications or running scripts for Ruby or whatever it might have been. But we ended up with this package that was what we needed to release, and then working out some way to deploy this package. It still might have been remote connect onto the machine, but then run a script that would unpack the archive, copy it to a location, repoint the IS config or the Apache config to where these new files were unpacked to, and now, like, while we still had a somewhat manual process, like we might have had to initiate the original action, we might have had to copy an artifact to a location, or we might have had to log in to run a script to do the deployment. Our runbook was no longer quite as complex of all the steps. You had a lot of that automated because you had a script that you could run that would do some of the tedious copy and pasting of files and things like that. But then we started to have build servers come into play. And these are things like TeamCity or Cruise Control, cruisecontrol.net, and like the various flavors for different languages, Bamboo and Azure DevOps Server. So this is like on-premise stuff. And they tended to be like an old machine that was sitting in the office. Maybe Jane, whose step got crossed out in the run book, she didn't need that machine anymore. So it was now the build server. And it would be the thing that would be sitting there, or maybe we were lucky enough to have a data center where we could like provision this infrastructure. But it was a physical machine somewhere that we had to like manage, and it would do monitoring for that trigger. Maybe it was monitoring our source control, so we pushed to our Mercurial system or our SVN or VSS, a Visual Source Safe, or maybe we're lucky enough to use something a little bit more modern than those tech, and then it would start the compilation step, or running those scripts that we would previously have run manually for us. And but the downside of these was they tended to be built on themselves. So it was, if you needed to do a .NET application, you would have to make sure you had the right version of the .NET framework on there for what you wanted to build. If you're doing Java, the right JDKs on there. And if you were doing multiple different versions of Java projects, and they're all targeting different JDKs, you'd have to have all of them there. And now all of a sudden your build server has got 100 different bits of software installed on it because each project needs something a little bit different. And then if you needed more build resources because you've got more teams starting up or you've got more projects that you need to build, well, now you've got to add more of these servers. You've got to hope that either people are upgrading their hardware in the office and you've got more computers lying around, or you can talk to your hosting company and say, well, how can we get some more hardware that we can turn into these build servers, because they were all it was something that you controlled and maintained, and it was your thing to look after. So what does that mean in the context of serverless? And why have I kind of given this history lesson of what DevOps sort of looks like if I'm talking about serverless, which is obviously a much more modern approach to the way that we can build applications? Well, if we have a look at a couple of different examples on how we can get started. So this is the Azure Functions on the left and the AWS Lambdas on the right. And this is where you kind of land when you first come to them and you're like, how do I get started? How do I create my first Lambda? Or how do I create my first function? With Azure Functions, it talks about opening up VS Code, and inside this document, if I did a larger screenshot and you scroll down further, you would use some tooling in VS Code to connect to Azure and then deploy that function directly into a resource in Azure. So essentially, right-click deploy, like we could do from Visual Studio or anything like that. With Lambdas, it talks about opening up the AWS console, that you create some stuff in there, you add some code, and then there's your Lambda deployed. Now, you can do the same with Azure Functions. You can go into the portal and create it and write some code in there. And with Lambdas, you can also use the AWS extensions for VS Code to do a similar thing to Azure Functions. But the problem is that these are very close to that dev in production scenario. Like, my machine is the one that's doing the deployment, whether it's via going into a portal and like literally editing in production, or whether I'm the one that's publishing the code off my machine. And I've got to hope that I've got all the dependencies correct for what I'm going to need in the production environment. I'm running the same version of Node on my machine. I'm not running that I'm trying to deploy to and things like that. And this makes me come back to a comment from one of my colleagues that friends don't let friends right-click publish. And that's because you really need to think about this automated build and deploy process, because while serverless applications, or at least certain aspects of serverless applications, tend to feel a little scripty, they're things that you're writing to plug together a couple of services and stuff like that. That kind of makes them, well, do they need this full rerun? Like, are we writing tests? Are we writing like this massive deployment pipeline? Do we need to have gates and approval checks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Same as we would with maybe a web application or something we're deploying into Kubernetes. Like, do we really need that? Can I just copy up this script file? Because it's like 100 lines of JavaScript. It'll be fine. Nothing's ever broken with JavaScript on, especially when we're dealing with different types that are coming in from unknown systems. That's always fine. So now, that's enough slides for the moment. I want to jump over and show you how to get started with the tooling that we are generally familiar with. So I'm going to use VS Code and GitHub Actions to set up a pipeline and do that as easily as I possibly can. So if I come over here, I've set up a Git repo that I'm going to start by cloning onto my machine. We're going to make a directory. I will call it ccdays. We'll go git clone. Oops, I copied that in, didn't I? Yep. Oh, no, hang on a sec. I got to git init because I didn't actually initialize the repository. And then we're going to open up VS Code. For a moment, for this to happen, there's nothing like live demos where you're like, how quickly is my editor going to fire up? There we go. And I'm going to start by creating just like the Hello World Azure Functions, as you would go by following like the introduction documentation that we've got on MS Docs website. I do have the Azure Functions extension installed in VS Code, but I have another extension installed here that, oops, opened up the wrong folder. Of course I did. That's going to cause me problems in the long run. I better remember that I put a Git repo in the wrong location. And then we will, come on, wait for my machine to realize that I've got to the wrong folder, open up Git init here, open up VS Code. I'm actually using the insiders build of VS Code, but that's just because I like to run with the pre-production stuff and test it for our teams back at Microsoft. But all this stuff that I'm covering off here works in VS Code stable release. And also, while I'm talking specifically about how we do things with Azure Functions and that kind of thing, the patterns that I want to hopefully instill through this talk can be applied to AWS Lambdas or Google Cloud Run. I think is the GCP version, or anything else like that. And again, while I'm going to be using a GitHub Actions for CI/CD, doesn't mean that this stuff is only ever going to work with GitHub Actions. Again, the patterns and practices are applicable to any CI/CD platform that you're working with. Okay, cool. So it looks like we're up and running. I'm going to open up the command palette, and we're going to go to create new project. And I'm just going to start up, like I said, a brand new Azure Functions project in this folder that I've got here. Any minute now, it's going to give me those options.
Aaron?
Any minute. There we go. No, I'm just kidding. I know it takes a moment or two. So I'm just going to do a JavaScript one. We're going to set up with, let's just go a HTTP trigger because it's the easiest one to test. Call it HTTP trigger 1 because there's definitely an hour of defaults when we're setting everything up.
Aaron, sorry to interrupt you for a minute.
Oh, yep. Oh.
Yeah, so I would like you to increase your font size.
Okay, cool. I will. Particularly in... I'll make sure the font size in the editor, I think, will be the important one. The terminal, I won't really be using that except for just a git pull and git clone. Is this font size better for everyone on the stream? I'm going to hope so, because I am not actually able to read the comments at the minute.
Yes, I think this should be fine.
Excellent. Yeah, I remembered to bump my editor, but I forgot to do my terminal. Always remember one, but not the other.
No issues. Carry on, Aaron.
Okay, cool. So yeah, like I said, this is your Hello World function that you can get from Azure, from Azure Functions, and this is done through the Azure Functions extension. Now, I'm just going to add that to the Git repo and then push it up to the one that I have there on GitHub. Any minute now when that terminal wants to run, or no, we'll come back to here. Zoom in. There we go. Boop. That font size should be a bit better. Git add -a. Wants to respond. Assuming it's still working. No, my terminal seems to not be happy. Whoops. Come back to here. What's my machine doing? Oh, here we go. Git add -a. Sure, we'll just ignore that error at the moment. From the terminal, it's just going to be, like I say, git add, git commit, git push. I won't actually be running anything from the terminal. We will go back to just the text editor in VS Code shortly when Git decides that this is going to be an adequate speed to operate at. Git commit -m. And then we want to init, because that's what I'm going to do. And then now I can paste in that initial push up to GitHub. So that's, like I said, this is just scaffold up the most basic of stuff. But what I actually want to do is I want to deploy this to an Azure function that I've already set up. So I've got some infrastructure already provisioned in Azure, and I want to be able to deploy this action to it. Sorry, this function to it. So for that, I'm going to open another extension. So I'll come to the extensions panel. I've already got it installed, but I'll just show it to everyone in here. And it's called deploy to Azure. Oh, my machine is performing really subpar today. That I do apologize for, because it is taking like even a long time to actually just search into the extensions gallery. Anyway, this deploy to Azure extension for VS Code does what you would expect it to do. It deploys to Azure. And by doing so, what it sets up is a DevOps pipeline, either using Azure, the Azure DevOps pipelines product, or using GitHub Actions. And we'll detect that based off of what kind of repository you're connected to, or you can actually go in and configure that yourself. So I've got this backed by GitHub, so it's going to detect that, and that way it will automatically configure a GitHub pipeline for a GitHub Actions pipeline. It's going to ask for some information. I need the resource group I want to deploy to inside of Azure, what kind of resource I'm deploying. So this is an Azure function on Node. And then where is it? It's this functions application. Now, the other thing that it's going to need is a personal access token from GitHub, which means that I'm going to share something to everyone on the live stream, and given this is recorded, to everyone watching in the future, an access token to my GitHub. Don't worry, I'm going to be cycling that this token as quickly as I can. Actually, maybe I'll show you where to go to get it. So I've gone to settings in GitHub, and we come down to developer settings, click to personal access tokens, and then we go generate token, and I'm going to need to give it access to the repository. So I will just have to sign into my GitHub again, because it's just, it wants to validate that I am who I say I am before going forward. Give that a minute to authenticate. And where are we? That's there. Oh no, it is going to be able to hopefully face sign me in, or we will just click. One of these is going to work. Live demos where passwords are involved. There we go. So that, that's frustrating in and of itself. Okay, let's just go bang. And I'm going to pop this off screen so that you don't actually get my password, because that would be bad for everyone. Everyone on the chat, talk amongst yourselves. Well, while my GitHub just has an issue. Oh, that's really quite annoying. Okay. I'm going to have to restart my browser because the page has frozen. Very annoying. That didn't happen in my demos, in my practice runs before. So we go github.com. Okay, yep, there we go. My browser has had an issue on the other screen, which is very frustrating because I had a whole bunch of tabs open, ready to go. But okay, so we're back into developer settings, personal access tokens, and then we will generate a new token. I will log in a moment. Go to my password manager, tell it to fill that, confirm. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to enable the repo access. So essentially what this personal access token, it allows someone to connect via the GitHub API to talk to do stuff with a repository. So in this case, I want to allow it access to the repositories, and we'll see why in a moment. And we'll call that 60 days. And then I come down here and I'm going to click generate token and pop it off screen so I can copy and paste that token without everyone else seeing it. Well, at least for more than a second now. Oh, it looks like I accidentally closed that GitHub project as well in my text editor. So this is going fantastic today. I guarantee this is probably not the most challenges I've had during a presentation. I did have one earlier this year where the power went out in the room that I was presenting in, which resulted in the projector going offline, the lights being turned off, my microphone becoming dead, and I still had about half of the talk to deliver in a completely empty room to a few hundred people. So the fact that I can't actually see anyone and know that you're all like, oh, this talk's going badly, means that I've got a lot more confidence that while it's going badly, no one is that bothered yet. But don't worry, we will get through this together. Okay, we'll just get my VS Code instance restarted. Once everything has loaded up again, we'll start setting up that pipeline. This does mean that I am probably running a little bit behind time. So the second demo that I wanted to do, I'm going to cut a little bit short and show you the end result of it rather than how we could go through and do the whole thing and actually do the implementation step by step, because I don't want to take time from the other speakers that are coming up for the rest of the day. Okay, we're back. We're going to open up the command palette and click the deploy to Azure again. Wait for the extensions to fully load. VS Code does a delay load on the extensions so that while things are starting to pop in, it hasn't fully loaded everything behind the scenes. But now I can start clicking back on those options that I had before. So the resource group inside of Azure that I want to connect to and deploy into, the type of application I'm deploying, it will then use that to determine the applications that are available within inside of where I'm deploying. So that's just coming back. There we go. It's that resource that I had before. We will paste in my, no, it's not an Azure DevOps application. Let's start that again. So here we go. Node, 60 days. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to paste in the personal access token and hit enter and see if anyone is able to freeze frame on that step itself. You've got like a one frame that you might be able to go back and try and get it before I delete this access token anyway. Okay, excellent. That is doing its things, and there we go. So what it's done is it's gone and created a GitHub Actions workflow file. I'm just going to quickly git add and then git commit and then finally push, adding workflow, and then git push. So we'll kick off this in the background before I come back and actually talk about what is happening in this. So behind the scenes, like I said, it set up this workflow file for me, and inside of this workflow file, if you did watch the session before around Azure DevOps and Azure pipelines, you'll see that there's actually a lot of stuff that's fairly similar to it. So we've got a trigger. In this case, it's on instead of trigger. And then it's on a push to a what branch? Well, the master branch, or you might have multiple branches that this is listening for, a name for it. And then we have the jobs that are going to be run when this workflow kicks off. So this only has a single job in it called build and deploy. We have what machine is going to run on. So it's going to run on a Windows Server 2019. You could use Ubuntu or Mac OS, and then you can specify specific versions, or you can just do -latest, which will be the latest version for that operating system. So that's another easy way to get started. And then we have the actions that are going to run with inside of that. So the first thing it's going to do is going to check out the code for the Git repo that this action is associated with, so I can get that source code. It's then going to log into Azure. Now, I need some credentials to be able to log into Azure for it to work with those resources that I've selected. And that's what this GitHub action does. It'll perform the login, but we need to provide it the credentials. And that's defined here with this $ double squiggly brackets, secrets.azure-credentials _ SHA there. That is a secret variable that was created for me by the extension and added to my Git repo. That was what I need the personal access token for. So I'm going to come back to my repos, and I'm actually going to bring that one up. So if we come to 60 days, let me just find it. And so this secret variable is created on my behalf. I haven't had to go and do anything. I don't actually know what that secret would contain, and there's no way for me to actually get to that. So if I come in here and go to settings on the Git repo, and then come down to secrets inside of this, we'll see that there is that secret that's there. Now I could delete it or I could update it, but there's no way to actually retrieve the value of that. So this is where you would put any sort of credentials that you might need to pass into the steps that you're performing with inside of your GitHub action workflow. Now we'll come back here and we'll just have a look at the rest of it. Now it's going to run some NPM steps because this is a Node project. If it was a Python project, it might run pip. If it's a .NET project, it'll run .NET commands. But what it'll do is it'll run npm install, so download all of our packages, npm build, and npm test. This will get me some output artifacts that it then uses with a Azure Functions GitHub action. The name is here is the app name inside of GitHub, inside of Azure that we selected using the extension here, and then where is the location of that file? So that's going to be uploaded. Come back to GitHub, click on Actions. We can see that our workflow is running. Excellent, which is what we'd hoped. I mean, we did do a push. We should have expected it to run. So it's there, it's going. We can come into it. We can see that the jobs that were triggered by that, so the build and deploy job, if we come into this, we can see the steps that were happening. We see that the NPM run has completed. We can have a look at the log files from that. It's got no tests, so they're not relevant yet, so it hasn't done any deployments. And then this will, it will ultimately deploy to Azure, which is the step that it's currently running. And then we can log into our portal, open up our function, and have a look at what that looks like and what's happened in that deployment. So I'll leave that to go. And instead, I want to have a look at a second demo application that I have and talk about, well, why this can be useful and some of the value that we can get out of doing these, like actually setting up the DevOps pipeline behind it. Demo, this one is data demo. So earlier today, I was going through, sorry, not earlier today, when I was actually writing this talk, I realized that I don't actually have that backup that I was hoping for. Yikes. I was looking at some of our samples around how we can work with Azure Functions to do serverless applications and some of the things that it can do in that space. And we actually have a bunch of examples on the Azure Samples GitHub repo. And I want to go to one of those in particular, which I had previously opened in a new tab on the browser that has the browser window that is now not responding. So we'll come to GitHub in a minute, github.com/Azure Samples, and then serverless data processing. Now, I'll share out these links in the chat after the talk, and I've got a couple of other links that I'll also share if people want to go back and have a look at them. But if we come into, I'm just going to pick this first one, for example. It's going to, this one's called file processing. The way that it works is that if we have a look at the actual function itself, is it's waiting for a file to be uploaded. Let me just zoom that in so that you can read it a little bit better on the live stream. So this has got a file that will be uploaded. It's going to get some configuration out of the function, so that, like the environment variable. It will unpack that file, which is going to contain a whole bunch of lines in it. Each line has a JSON payload in it, so it's going to unpack that JSON payload. It's going to then turn it into a JavaScript object and then pass it over to Cosmos DB to write to. Now, again, this is obviously very specific to Azure sort of stuff, but the concepts are the same regardless of what serverless platform you're working with. You're getting a file in from somewhere, you're processing that file, and you're running it to some sort of a database. But the way that we would deploy this one is it actually talks through how to deploy it using essentially copy and pasting into the portal. So this is the sort of thing that would be really easy to spin up a GitHub action pipeline to deploy it. Because while you can copy and paste it, it does have some, it's not the desired outcome. And also, once you've done that, you can look at how you could add some basic testing. Like this function here that's actually processing the data that's on each line. Maybe you want to extract that out and write a test. Those are the sorts of things that you can start doing. Whereas this is only, if we have a quick scroll down, it's 59 lines of code to process a file and dump it in. So it's like, well, maybe we can just quickly copy and paste it into a portal or through the dashboard or something like that. But there is definitely value in making sure that we have this automated so that down the track, if someone needs to make a change to it, they don't accidentally copy and paste an old version, or that they get that confidence that you get behind an automated deployment process. But in the essence of time, I'm going to jump back to the slides, and we're going to power on forward a little bit into some other things that I want to talk about, which is the role that serverless can play in conjunction to a DevOps process. Now, you might be thinking, well, like, why is that relevant? I'm building serverless applications that are they're running the back end of a web application, or they're doing some data crunching from like our a real-time analytics system, or it's doing some monitoring of services and providing out some insights. Well, where could DevOps fit then? So where could serverless fit for DevOps? Well, I actually think serverless is a good model for the way that we can work with our DevOps pipelines. Now, if we think back to what I was talking about originally, like how when build servers started becoming a common thing that people were putting in, they were all physical servers. But now we've moved very much more towards this this server and agent model. With Azure pipelines, you install agents, and you can have as many of those as you want. You can get them from Microsoft, or you can self-host them. Similar with GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions, everything is run basically as Docker containers or as node commands. So little node applications, and those are the different steps that you can run. Similarly with Jenkins and Bamboo and TeamCity and all those other continuous integration, continuous delivery tools use this disconnected approach. So they're already targeting a serverless model. You don't have to think about the server and spend hours crafting what needs to be installed. They're already serverless. But also, if you wanted to do something like insights into what's happening in your pipeline, or run something from your pipeline that's outside of what you might be able to write in YAML or with a custom task or step, serverless is on demand anyway. Like, you don't need to have a constantly running server that's going to be waiting for your DevOps process, so you could have that elsewhere. And something that fits that model nicely is ChatOps. So writing custom Slack commands, like if you're using Slack or whatever your chat platform is of choice internally at your company, it's really easy to write some kind of command extension. This is an article that I wrote on how to do Slack commands on Azure Functions. And then you could have this as like a command that triggers a webhook on GitHub to kick off a workflow. The GitHub workflow that we saw for that GitHub Actions was listening to a push to a particular branch, but it can also listen to a bunch of other things, such as what they call a repository dispatch. That's when a webhook's happened. So that could be how you trigger off a release, rather than you don't want to push to master branch and all of a sudden you've deployed to production. Well, you trigger a workflow on a webhook, or you might have another webhook that runs the automated tests. Maybe you have a bunch of information you want to understand about your environments. What's been deployed? What were the last 5 deployments? What commits went out in there? What work items were associated with that? So you could write a little serverless function that is going to pull that data together from a number of different systems, so that you can execute that from your chat tool of choice and get that information back. And it's just an on-demand. Like, you don't need a server constantly running, doing nothing for like 23 and a half of the 24 hours in a day. What about the idea of validating infrastructure? With Azure, we have resource manager templates, or RM templates, that we use to define what our infrastructure looks like and deploy. It's a similar thing to like CloudFormation or Terraform and stuff like that. But these templates can be kind of slow to test when they're deployed, because they're often validated at runtime. Basically, what the system will do is it will look at the template that you want to deploy, look at all the resources that are already deployed that are in that target environment, and do a diff of them. And that can be slow, particularly if you've got a large environment. So I read this article. So I'm not going to take claim to this idea. There's an article I read that talks about, well, if you have infrastructure as code, you could create a hash of that file that represents your infrastructure as code, store that somewhere, and then have a serverless function that every time your pipeline runs, it calls the function with the most up-to-date version from source control and says, here's the hash of that file. Does it match the last hash that was given? If it does, well, we're not even going to attempt to update our environment, because we know that they're the same, unless someone has logged in and done stuff just directly through portals or through CLIs, and then you've got other problems because of change management. But the idea of being able to validate that can really reduce the amount of complexity you have with inside of your deployment process, because it just goes, is the upcoming state the same as the last known state? Yes, sweet. We're not going to attempt to change our environment state. And the final one is, what if we wanted to automatically generate release notes for our deployments? So we can look at what work items or issues or pull requests have happened since the last release went out. They've been merged, pull requests, or issues that have been closed, or whatever it might be. We can look at those by knowing when the last release was and looking at that through the APIs, or we just look back in time because we're only doing deployments every Friday or every Monday morning or whatever it might be, and pull those out. And then generate a markdown file that we can push out as part of our release, or a text document, or whatever it might be, and include that in the outbound artifacts. Now, this can be really useful if you're creating libraries that you're publishing onto whether it's NuGet or NPM. And I've created a link here if I can get it to load up. So I'll click on that. There we go. And this is a article, if I can find which browser that went to. There it goes. So this is an article about how to do that with Azure DevOps. So this is not for GitHub Actions. This is for Azure DevOps, which was covered off in the previous session. And it's got a code walkthrough on how you do that. And you basically plug it in as an additional step for your workflow. You just call this, it generates the file, and then you save it back down because it comes back as a response. You save that to the artifact location that you're publishing out with your release. And that's, again, this is not something that needs to be constantly running and constantly available. You just need to run it on demand. So just to wrap up, serverless deployments, you want to treat them like any other part of your application stack. And whether it's a web application or a Kubernetes cluster, just because it's only 50 lines of code doesn't mean that you shouldn't have repeatable deployments behind it. You shouldn't be able to add testing without it being done on a developer's machine or anything like that. And with things like the deploy to Azure extension in VS Code, it's really easy to scaffold up that workflow initially and get it started for you. VS Code, like I said, it's super powerful to be able to do this, whether it's GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps. To get started, quite easy and simple to fire it all off. But also consider what role serverless could play to give you better insights into a DevOps pipeline. Whether that is something in Slack so that you can pull back some information about what's happening in your current environment and what's deployed and whatnot. Or maybe it is you want to be able to generate release notes that you can publish out as part of a release package so that someone down the track can look back and go, well, what was included in this deployment? There we go. There's a set of release notes that we have for us. Thank you for listening in today. My name's Aaron Powell. Again, here is where you can find me online. And I'll jump back and see if there are any questions.